And now we have 2 generations of top flight award-winning producers to share with us some of the backstories of some of their favorite shows that they produced. And I want to welcome you and thank you so much for being with us tonight. Now, before we move any further along, if you don't know anything about Chesapeake Forum is an academy for lifelong learning. You may have known of us back in the Maritime Museum days. We split off in the fall of 2019 and became Chesapeake Forum. And now we are a part of the YMCA and the Chesapeake, all throughout the Eastern Shore. So with that in mind, I want to introduce our Vice President, Bruce Purdy, who through his knowing the finds, both generations of finds, and I think the 3rd generation of producing finds as well, he will be telling us a little bit more about the program, and he will be moderating the discussion tonight. So there.
Thank you, Lynn. I hope you don't mind if I'm sort of sitting like this because the light's glaring in my eye and I have to look at it too. Yeah. So hello and good evening and welcome everyone to Lights, Camera, Action. We are delighted to have you here tonight, and I think it will be a night that you remember. Husband and wife team filmmakers are pretty rare, but an entire family of filmmakers even rarer. But in the Fine family, it's the norm. On the stage here tonight, we have 2 generations, but in fact, there are 3 generations of photographers in the Fine family. Paul's father was the photographer of the Washington Redskins for 47 years. Go Skins! Sitting on my right are Holly and Paul Fine, who many of you may know, a husband and wife team of producers, directors, who have garnered more than 80 Emmys, a George Foster Peabody Award, including a Peabody Lifetime Achievement Award. Paul produced, directed 4 Peabodys. Paul produced, directed, and shot the camera. Holly produced, directed, wrote, and edited all their stories over their 40-year career in local TV, CBS, and ABC. They did over 40 stories for 60 Minutes, over 15 documentaries, including the 60-minute 25th anniversary special, which was the highest-rated TV show that year, second only to the Super Bowl. Wow. Tim Shales, if anybody remembers him, he was the great Washington Post TV critic, said about their work, they use a distinctive style while giving a human face to complex contemporary issues. Their work for the networks on any given night reached 20 to 40 million people. Sitting on the other side of me, over here, are Sean and Andrea Nix Fine. Way back when, Sean goes to Connecticut College, Andrea to Colby. Both end up working at National Geographic. They fall in love, get married, and started making their own films together. Their first film was War Dance, which won Sundance's Best Director and was nominated for an Academy Award. Then came Innocente, clips of which you're going to see tonight, and for which they won an Oscar. They now have their own film company. Yes. They now have their own film company, Change Content, and have most recently produced The Six, about January 6th. portrayal of a city and nation under siege, told by 6 people whose lives will be forever changed. Again, we'll see clips of that as well today. Their raw, intimate storytelling style has been hailed by critics as visually ravishing and enormously spirit-raising. So tonight, we have an opportunity to dig into the impact the fine family works has had over many decades. In the similarities and differences they share, and where they see the future of storytelling. By the way, they would ask that questions be held to the end. With this, I'd like to turn it over to Holly. Holly, you're on.
Are you asking me this question that you were supposed to ask?
I am asking you this. Tell us about the first clip that we will see. By the way, I want to say that it's a good.
We do not do investigative report. I think we did maybe 2 and they were really bad. Anyway, and we don't do a lot of talking heads. I'm sure you all know what a talking head is, right? Just a camera talking. We didn't do a lot of those. In fact, when we were interviewing at CBS for our job, at CBS Reports in 60 Minutes, they brought Don Hewitt in to meet us. He was the executive producer of 60 Minutes. And my husband, who was very full of himself, says to, because all the networks were trying to hire us, says to Don Hewitt, I don't like your show at all. I'm sitting there, because you just do too many talking heads, and I don't like talking heads. I wanted to scrape myself off the floor. I said, that's it, they're never going to hire us. No, Don Hewitt stood up and he goes, I resent that. I am going to send you some pieces we did where we had very few talking heads. And I want to see your work too. So we exchanged pieces back and forth.
The next morning was a stack of videos.
Only about that high.
At least 5 feet high.
Here we go.
That said, you better watch these.
Okay, so now to the first clip. This clip, when we were at Channel 7, a friend of ours worked at GW. Ronald Reagan had been shot. And he came to see us about 6 months later and he said, you guys, I think I have a story you might appreciate. I'd like to give you the doctors and nurses who saved Ronald Reagan's life and let you film them. Well, we're both going, oh, really? Okay. And he laughed and we're going, my God, this is unbelievable. He wanted us to do a round table discussion, you know, with them all talking about what they did, sitting around the table like this. And that isn't what we did. So what we decided we were going to do is we were going to put that aside. We were going to recreate what happened that day with the real doctors and nurses playing themselves. And well, you're going to talk about who played the president, right? Well, anyway, we had to get Alexandria Theater for somebody to come in to play President Reagan and the Secret Service because they would not be a part of it with us. They said they couldn't. So this was, that we were the first people to report that Ronald Reagan was close to death in this piece that we did. It garnered, oh my Lord, it went everywhere. 2020 bought it, all the networks came to hire us, and I'm going to pass it on to you now.
We went there and kind of didn't know what we were going to try and do and work, but we went for it. And we did, what we did was call the nurses, the staff, the doctors, and we interviewed them on audio tape. And so we used their audio tape as a script. We didn't write it, they wrote it. And then we asked them if they would participate and reenact it themselves. There was a lot of no, they actually made me sit in a hospital for, I guess, 2 weeks to say, there'll be another one that comes in just like the president.
You can film that.
We just laughed to ourselves, and I sat there for 2 weeks. And then we said, can we do it our way now? And they said, yes. And the doctors, a lot of them said no, but actually at the end of this story, when it aired on television, they all had cocktail parties at their house, celebrating themselves.
But the key was Ben Aaron, who was a surgeon who saved Reagan's life. And when he said yes, they all fell like dominoes. Oh, did he say yes? Okay.
So to give you a little bit of idea of how we did our thing was to not stick a camera into somebody's face right away. We would, am I talking loud enough?
No.
Covering up what I gotta say.
Always a producer.
We usually did, most of the time, we bring an audio recorder and just have conversations with people. Not to put them on the spot, because they're usually nervous and everything, especially for 60 minutes, but we just like to make them comfortable and just have conversations. We get a lot from doing that. Back to the president being shot, we tried to get the Secret Service to do it. They all wanted to do it, but their bosses wouldn't let them do it. From pushing them into the car and taking them into the ER and everything. So that was the only part we had to get actors from an acting group at, I think, in Arlington, Alexandria. And the fellow who played Reagan in that group had all the features of Ronald Reagan, pretty close to the face, but I avoided shooting his face through the whole thing. He was very good, and we couldn't show his face. It was stupid to do that. So we recreated this from the beginning of when he, the limo was on the way to the hospital, and we recreated it, and they pulled up to GW Hospital, and the actor got out, but he looked like Reagan, and all of a sudden there were, I didn't write this down, but there was 3 news crews sitting there saying, did you get the shots of the president getting shot?
They thought it was real.
They thought it was real. The whole thing, they thought it was real, and they got kind of embarrassed. Yeah, but, I shot him from the back side. I shot him everywhere where you couldn't really see his face, and, we talked about that.
Are you ready to run that?
Ready to run it?
Ready the clip? Okay.
And then I went out the door and hit the ramp almost simultaneously with the limousine. And I think the first person to step out was the Secret Service person.
I found the president, and he sort of told me the body language, I'm going to walk in here.
And the Secret Service people kind of gathered around and then started sweeping him into the emergency room.
I remember very well walking into that emergency room, not even knowing that I'd been shot. I only learned afterward in reading I wasn't quite as well as I thought I was at the time. Well, I told Ray Shattuck to be almost immediately, it was to set up a perimeter. It's like taking the White House to GW.
Those police might be scared for commotion in this town. Average people started to report the trauma day.
By the way, we did interview Ronald Reagan. He agreed to, after we finished filming, and we integrated his voice into, that is him, and we had a sit down with him at the end where he talked about how we wanted to thank the doctors and nurses for the great care.
Thank you.
But I think one thing these guys are gonna probably say is that, you know, we see this in our world now all the time. We see recreations in our world all the time. Like now you see it, if you guys watch Netflix or whatever, they recreate something that happened. At that time, this had never been done before. So this was a creative leap for local TV, two local TV producers that did this on their own to make something, to make a film. And now we see these things all the time, but I constantly have people come up to me saying, you know, I remember that film. That film like set the precedent that we could do this. We could try this creatively. So that's one thing they will never talk about.
So it was for local.
Yeah, it was for local. Yeah, you guys would be probably honest, but this is their first big thing for a local, one of their first big for a local TV channel. And
The last thing we did,
and it got so widely watched that's why 60 Minutes called it, because this was so creative and so different. And who are these people? We need these people. And
we
so,
went on vacation after this aired, and the people behind us in the airplane were talking about it. Did you see that last night? What happened? They were actually there.
That was the coolest thing.
We didn't tell them.
It was
I say it because they're techniques that people in our industry now take for granted. But back then, those techniques were not used. They were not. You didn't do this, and so it was groundbreaking.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Moving on.
Yeah.
Sean, tell us about the next clip you're going to show us. War dance.
Okay. So this is just it's a special clip for us because this is and we can both talk about it. I mean, this is our first documentary together as a team, because when we were at National Geographic, we tried to work together on one thing, two things, and it did not end up very well. We were dating at the time. It ended up, but we put a pin in it and said, like, we're gonna focus on our relationship. We love each other too much. So we did that. And then we basically decided, we learned a lot at National Geographic. We decided, we got married, we left. We said, we're gonna, try and do this on our own, be freelance. And this couple called us and said, we want to tell a documentary about kids in northern Uganda. And we said, well, what's going on there? And we'd been all over the world by that point. We filmed a lot of dangerous things. We felt like we should have known what was going on. And we started looking into it. We found out that 60,000 kids had been abducted by this rebel leader in northern Uganda named Joseph Kony. And so we set out to tell this story about the kids. And we decided before we even left that we wanted to tell it from their point of view, because at that time, no one was really talking to kids. No one was listening to what they had to say. It was always like, NGO people or nonprofit people telling you what the war was going on. So we chose this clip just because it's the beginning of the film, but it's probably one of the most, it's probably our favorite film that we've made, and we're very proud of it. What it took to make it, filming in a war zone, creatively what it did, it definitely set a stamp on the industry a little bit when it came out at Sundance. People didn't know who we were. It kind of got really big. So it kind of set us on the trajectory we are on today.
And I think for us, this was a huge leap because Geographic does a lot of things really well, and they make beautiful films, but telling a story like this in a way that felt super personal, having the kids look directly into the lens, it was something we'd never tried before in anything. And so it was kind of like taking handcuffs off, and we you know, we just bought this, like, our first house and had our first son, and we were cutting it, and well, we weren't cutting it, we had an editor, but in the basement, and it was just like our little nest project, but you know, you don't know what it's gonna do until you start having people watch it, and we really didn't have anybody watch it until pretty much it was
Till Sunday.
until Sundance. That was the first public screening that we were ever at. So this film, I think, remains probably one of our favorites, if not the favorite, because it just holds up. There's certain things that you're like, oh, I'm so proud of that work. It's beautiful, it's emotional, it got a story across in a really personal way. And it took us into a whole new world of independent filmmaking, because prior to that, when you work at networks or things like that, or National Geographic, it's kind of corporate in a way. And so this was the Wild West of independent filmmaking, and we kind of jumped in.
Let's take a look.
More.
Yeah. To us, it's quiet, and so I can't.
I might just be oversitting.
Yeah.
Andrea, that's quite a leap into going internationally, first of all, and young filmmaker doing that. How did you happen to get into filmmaking yourself?
Well, I didn't know anybody ever that did anything like this growing up. I grew up in Rochester, New York. I didn't know, I think I knew someone was a photographer that I'd heard of, but I didn't know any filmmakers. I didn't know, never thought of film school. I just didn't think that people, I don't know, just never thought it would be an option for me. I didn't cross lines with anybody. But I took a college course my senior year that was a literature course, but you made a documentary at the second half of the course. And all of a sudden I just loved it. I loved every piece of it and trying to get in there. I just, it was kind of just a bunch of us running around making it up. It's horrible what we made, but I loved it. And so I just, after that, I got a job at a PBS station in Rochester, WXXI, where you were like making the sets and filming studio camera and like running around doing sound and all that. And I just love that too. And I just kind of just worked through it. I just kept on trying to get hired. I worked in a post-production house, which is more the technical editing side, to learn that side because I didn't know anything about it. And then I moved to DC and was assisting a cameraman, like carrying his stuff, I tried to just keep putting myself next to people who knew what they were doing and just studying all of it like a sponge. And I something I think Sean and I, all four of us, just the tenacity you have to make films, because documentaries, because it's never a clear path usually about how you get it done. So I got a job at National Geographic. I kind of, got in there and first worked on that technical side, and then kept on pushing to finally get to a point where I could make my own films. And at that point, that's when Sean and I met. We were both trying, we were kind of going all over the planet in different countries for different reasons. He was kind of more doing the war, kind of like more war zone, like people stuff, and I was kind of more doing like crazy crocodile, big culture, music, cultural, that kind of stuff. Not so war dangerous, but more kind of cultural and animal focused. But and so when War Dance was really what was kind of, I feel like that was like a baptism into what I really wanted to do. I just didn't realize it until we started watching our films and making them, and it was all about the craft, as opposed to just kind of doing something cool. It was all about, for the first time, I was able to like work on something that felt really meaningful in a artistic way, because I never thought of myself as an artist until we started working and making that kind of film.
And we used to love movies, so like when we dated, that's all we would do. We would go work at Geographic, then we'd go to movies every night. I mean, maybe sometimes 2 movies a night. And we would just talk about the movies and how they were made, what they were, and even War Dance, we referenced movies, but we did kind of the beginning of kind of thinking about it and conceptualizing. It was all based on movies. Some of it's like Lee movies, like, so I think that was a big part of it too.
And I'm struck by watching your president clip that feels like a movie. And I wondered if you all ever felt, sorry, Bruce, I'm gonna take over this question, but if you ever wanted to cross into narrative features, did you ever think about doing that?
He did, yeah, always. And we only did 2 films like that. This one and a film called The Plane That Fell from the Sky.
Yeah.
Which was an incredible film. And we took the real passengers. A plane fell out of the air 33,000 feet in less than a minute, and the pilots got it back up again, and we recreated that.
With the real people, right?
With the real people, we took with the real people on the plane, with the real pilots. It was a monument. That was our first film.
It is incredible.
For CBS.
Yes.
It's really,
First film.
But let me tell you, during this filming, we were there doing it, and I had to hire some lighting guys to help me out. And we're shooting and everything, and we're about, I guess, a day in the shooting. And he said, "What the hell did you give these actors?"
That's not
I said, "They ain't actors."
The real thing.
Look it up. I'm sure it's on somewhere.
It is.
The plane that fell from the sky.
Okay, let's move on. Very different topic. Celebrities.
Oh, you're going there?
We like to,
That's in the end.
no, it isn't.
No, fine.
I'll just
I gave you this one.
Sorry, looking up there. I was gonna end with her.
That's okay. Good. Really good. You like to do celebrity profiles, right?
Exactly.
When you were at 60 Minutes, you worked with Ray Charles. You did a piece on Kirk Douglas. You did a piece on Julie Andrews. You did a piece on Sting, just to name a few. But one of those profiles you did, one of the most famous pieces that you ever did. Paul, will you explain your time with Barbra Streisand?
Mike Wallace called us up.
No.
With the teeth went all over the place.
I know. We didn't want to work with Mike Wallace. You want me to take your place?
Oh, my God. We never wanted to work with Mike Wallace.
We were afraid of her. Who wasn't?
Afraid of I went in the bathroom to take a piss. And right at the urinal next to me, Mike walks up. And I'm looking over here and he's looking at me. And he says, "Why the hell won't you guys work with me?" And I said, "Well, and I said, well, we don't do, investigative stories." He said, "You think I only do investigative stories?" And he said, "You'll be working with me soon." And I went, "Well, geez." But, I want to tell you that, oh, okay. All right. Mike called this one after.
No. I've said in the end, he became our favorite correspondent. We wanted to work with him all the time. And then Bradley got mad and Safer got mad, but
We kind of floated from Morley Safer to Mike, to Ed Bradley, back and forth. But we wound up probably more stories with Mike Wallace, which surprised me. We became, the first time
no, go ahead.
the first time I went into his office to meet him, I was petrified, really petrified. And I came in and he just looked at me. I said, "Oh, he's playing the game here." And I said, "You know, I don't know if you like visual pieces and all this kind of stuff." And he said, "Paul, you are going to do a piece real soon, and it's going to happen real soon, and it's going to be with me." And I will tell you, I learned so much, we learned so much from him.
He was like Paul's second father. He became Paul's second father. He was. But one afternoon he calls us and says, "I have a story idea. How would you like to do a profile on Barbara Streisand?" And our desks were across the room from each other, and he goes, "Yes, we would." The next day we were on a plane to LA to meet her. We met her. Her agent picked us up at the airport. We went to her house for dinner. She talked nonstop, 2 to 3 hours. I think we ate at 10 o'clock LA time. Wow. But the film was on. She was filmed.
Not until I told her.
And after you tell her what you told her at dinner. Oh,
I told her she had the most beautiful hands I've ever seen.
is
I got her.
Yeah, that was it. Anyway. She was doing Prince of Tides. And a week later, Paul was filming her. All right, Mr. Compliment.
She was very open with me. She let me, I told her part of the deal was that I got to follow her everywhere. She couldn't say, "No, you can't shoot that. You can't do that." But she would get very involved in the lighting when I was lighting.
That's an overshoot. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. All right, go ahead.
All right.
She called the house at night.
All right, what happened here is that, at night, had I met Barbara then?
Yes.
Yes, we had met Barbara then, and then all of a sudden, when we got home, there was a battle going on the telephone, every night. At 10 o'clock, Mike would call me and
Good morning, Michael.
so Mike would call because Barbara would call me at night. And Mike wanted to know what Barbara was saying, and Barbara wanted to know what Mike was saying. And Mike had not had a good time with her on a radio show at one time, and it's not. What we didn't know is we were going to do a profile of an actress and try and get into her head and learn things. And, Mike went after her.
Right.
He decided to do an investigative piece all of a sudden. And
Well, he called our hotel room in the morning, we were doing the interview, and he said, I think I figured her out. And we're like, yes, she has no soul. Holy God. We are going in to do an in-depth, a big interview with her. What is he gonna do to her? He grilled her in that interview, but she gave it right back to him. And once the piece was done, he hated it. I look so mean. Like, you're mean. Like, okay, but Don Hewitt loved it, A+++, and he would bring other producers in to watch the piece when they brought a profile. I want you to see this piece, this is how I want our profile. Well, needless to say, the other producers couldn't stand us. I would have to look at that piece one more time. So it is one of the most famous profiles on 60 Minutes, that was ever on 60 Minutes. And here's the piece.
Let's show it.
Dear people of the world,
Wait a minute, the wrong thing.
Yeah, see, it's not very hard.
I'm not just a girl, I'm a girl.
It's innocent. It's the last one before it's grandson.
Well, I'll just talk while we're figuring this out.
When do we
So-
pause that?
We'll look at it later.
But no, I mean, something that, so, I remember being a kid and these guys explaining to me that the reason they do these famous people, because I always knew my parents did things on people that were like fighting homelessness and, you know, like trying to do good in the world. They were always trying to expose things that people don't really pay attention to. They were trying to give a voice to people that are voiceless. And they would do that by embedding their cameras and their skills. And, you know, whether it was my dad sleeping overnight in a prison or, you know, sleeping out in a homeless shelter to understand what it was like for the guy who was filming that was running that shelter. And then sometimes I'd go with him and get to meet the people that he was filming. Or whether I was back and my mom was, you know, now we edit on computers. Back then she had film everywhere. She's a genius. She's like a mad scientist, just moving things around. I mean, it was. Everyone always, because I'm a cinematographer, everybody always talks about what I learned from my dad. I learned a ton from my dad, but I learned so much about how to film things, especially documentaries, from watching my mom, because she just sat there putting things together in pieces, and it was like someone took a massive puzzle and threw it on the ground, and she had to figure it out and make sense of it and make it beautiful. And she did it every time, and I remember just being amazed by it. And so, like, they would do this, and I remember saying to them once, like, why do you do all these famous people? Like, why? I thought, you know, and they were like, we do things on famous people so that 60 Minutes will let us do things on people that aren't famous. It's kind of like we have to do that. And then I remember them saying, we do things on famous people that are different. We don't just do them on because they're famous. Like, now you see things on people, they have a movie coming out, they talk about their movie things, they're like, we want to know who they are. They have to be more than famous. They have to have a story. And I remember that, and this is just a small story, but when we won the Oscar, you know, the Oscar for Innocente, we were at the Vanity Fair party, and I met probably like 4 or 5 different movie stars, especially Michael Douglas, who came up to me and said, I remember your parents filmed my dad. And it was incredible, the story they told about him. And I was like, this is a crazy moment that we're like meeting these celebrities that remember my parents who made films on them. It was a really crazy moment. But I remember him saying, you know, I remember that because it was a story. No one's ever told the story of my dad. And it meant a lot to me. And so that's just something, you know, I think this kind of thing, I mean, I like showing these clips and I like talking about the clips, but I think something that's interesting here is while we're sitting here and we're talking, I'm reflecting on this back and forth that's going on and the things that we've learned, the things that are different, and there's things, now that I do this, that I see that they probably don't realize that they did, or that I was watching you guys do, because when you do it, it's your job, it's a whole hat, you don't think about it. And that's also what I love about my parents, they don't really think about, I don't mean this in a rude way, they don't think about the filmmaking too deeply, like they do it from the heart, like if it feels right, they make it, they do it, it feels right, and they trust their instinct when they do it, and it's very creative and organic, and I think that's something that's really incredible about their work, and
I can always say, Sean, I remember you being 3 years old, sitting in my attic room, stacking film cores. Do you all know what a film core is?
it's what you roll the film.
But you roll the film around, and they used to be yellow from Coda, and he would stack them up like Legos, and that's how he actually started.
But I also know the other thing, just a really quick story, because you guys talk about Mike Wallace, he's a terrifying man. Like I grew up with him calling our house, like I'd be like, hello, and he'd be like, is your father there? And I'd be like, yeah, and he's like, what kind of word is yeah? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And he'd be like, what are your grades? He'd be really intense, but I also remember being with them and him throwing a tantrum, like I was with my dad in a hospital, there all night filming a show about violence in America. This kid had just come in, he had shot in the head, it was a really traumatic scene. My dad filmed the whole thing. I got to hold some lights and watch the whole thing. And Mike Wallace was going to interview the doctor who had saved the kid or who was working on the kid. And he was throwing some kind of temper tantrum about the lighting or something. And my dad just said to him, like, Mike, your fly is down. It was in hospital scrubs. He looked down and he stopped. And I remember thinking, wow, like he just didn't care. I mean, my dad was definitely nervous, but he has a way of diffusing people. It's also something, it's something that he probably won't know, but he takes people that, I don't know, they're nervous or they're like, think too high of themselves, and he just has a calming way of bringing it down and making everybody on the same level, and I love that about what I got to watch too. So that's just a little bit, as I think about Barbra Streisand, you guys talk about that, it's stuff that I think back on and just think it's interesting to share.
That's a great thing to say about your folks. Okay, here we go. Got it.
We're derailed at this point.
If you guys like this, it's like,
60 minutes you go in with the executive producers on you and he screens your stuff. And you go in there, it's like a movie theater, and you're petrified. If he's gonna like it or not, or if he doesn't like it, it doesn't go on the air and all that.
For changing.
That kind of stuff. And, Mike helped me out a lot.
In the screening.
Okay,
Okay.
are we good for Barbara?
No.
No?
Yes.
Can we,
I have a black screen.
you have a black screen?
Just on her slide.
Oh, no.
I don't like to be in this
Here she is.
It's like if I'm in a work process and I'm dealing with an ad, and somebody tells me they darkened a certain letter or made a certain color, and then they don't. I don't like that. So they see a certain side of me that people might call difficult.
She says she doesn't want cameras to film her at work because it's too distracting.
77. 77.
She's so close to me.
3, 4. Take 2.
Putting on
Watch director Streisand take over in this
What,
one.
can I just say the difference if you put that one light bulb on right there? Come in closer on the back camera to sort of simulate the distance and stuff. I think you're better in this camera because this is a little too far over. Do I have to put you on?
Leave the shoes off all and start the interview, please.
They say I'm difficult?
I have to say, gems. You get the real gems.
Okay,
Yes.
we're moving on. And we're kind of seeing something about Innocente, which is Sean and Andrea's wonderful film. Sean, tell us how that film got started and how it evolved.
We just, it's a long story, but I'll shorten it. We were asked, we were making a film about resilience and people that are resilient around the world, and Innocente was one of the characters, but that film was with a very famous actor at the time who decided not to work on that film anymore. So we then thought we need to make a film about homelessness and who's the most, at that time, who was the most misrepresented part of homelessness, and the most growing population of homelessness in America was kids. And so we thought we had to, tell their voice, it's their voice, they need to tell what it's like to be homeless, and we need to understand that. And so we found Innocente, the young girl you're about to watch here in San Diego. And this is, once again, this is the beginning of the film.
Dear people of the world, I'm not just a girl. I'm a girl who likes to jump in puddles and likes flowers. Just because I'm homeless doesn't mean I don't have a life, because I do have a life. When I paint, I feel happy, so in the morning, it's a good way to start my mornings. Just paint on something. And what better place than my face? When I put my makeup on and dress how I dress, and I get out there, I feel confident, although I'm a really shy person. If people knew my story, they'd probably think that I should be painting like dark pictures or dark paintings.
Andrea, a quick question for you. How do you come to the topic? Is it through, how do you,
That's a good story.
yeah, what makes a good story?
I think the character is where it all starts. Like, good stories are made from good characters. It's something that Sean always said from the very beginning. It's true. It's very much, there's something about somebody that has the thing, right? And you're just drawn to them. And that's part of it. There's just this internal charisma that some people can handle. The camera, the weight of like relating where they're coming from, and you're drawn into it. And some of that's intangible, you can't really describe it, you feel it. I also think a story is made from a journey that is transformational. So where you are, is it where you start, and where you end is at a different place because you walked in the shoes of the person that you've become to know and care about a great deal. I think we're really drawn to stories that make you care. And through that, you might feel like you have nothing to relate to that child there talking in the very beginning. She's homeless, so they were brought over the border. Her father was deported for domestic abuse, and they've been living in shelters up through 9 years in San Diego. And she, what do we all in this room have to do with that life? Very few people would probably say anything, except that you start really inhabiting that life, and I think people who bring you into their life and being able to show and have a journey that you're changed by is really beautiful to us. And I think the last part is that it has to be highly visual. The story, it's really hard to tell the story when there's just not any visuals, because we really try to have a cinematic side to the journey that you're also on. We want our docs to feel like what you feel like when you watch a narrative film. And we work really, really hard to do that. So I think that's partly what we're drawn to in the work that we do.
Back over to this side of the table.
And I just want to say that we are so proud of them. I got
Okay.
I only wish my father could see this over here. Three of us are photographers, my father and me.
Right.
He missed this.
So, Colleen Paul, you seem to tell pretty intimate stories that sometimes are pretty hard to watch.
Okay, how do you like this one?
Okay. So I'm gonna say it again. You seem to tell pretty intimate stories that are sometimes hard to watch, Colleen. How do you make the audience look and not turn away?
We did, okay. We did 2 stories for ABC's Nightline. Something we always kind of like Ted Koppel and everything. We wanted to work with Nightline because they went out on a limb a lot. And we always wanted to film what happens in a burn unit. Mainly because when I was young, I was badly burned with playing with matches. And I just remembered all the things that happened to me in the burn unit, and we both thought it was a good piece to do. So after the Pentagon, we went to the Washington Hospital Center where we had done some medical stories. We did a lot of medical stories. And we went to the head of the burn unit, Dr. Jordan, and we talked to him about the possibility of filming in the burn unit with the people from the Pentagon. And he said, well, first, it's fine with us here at the staff, but you have to talk to the parents, the sisters, the brothers, the people, the families, and you have to talk to them. He gathered all of them up at one time for us to talk to, which I looked in their eyes, and their eyes were empty. They were like still in shock, almost. And we explained to them what we wanted to do, and they talked about it. I guess we came back in a little bit, and they all said yes. Some of them actually told me later that they thought that their parents or whatever were going to get treated better if we were filming.
Smart.
Which I thought was very smart. Yeah. All right.
We picked 2 people. Louise Kurtz, it was her second day on the job at the Pentagon. She had just lost 40 pounds. She was in a cute little dress, she told me, and I was over by the copy machine, and it hit, and she went like this. Total face, hands all burned off, and we picked Colonel Brian Birdwell, a fabulous guy from Tennessee. Anyway, so Texas, Tennessee, I think they moved there now. And we started following with their cameras through the recovery, the painful days and nights. Paul and his soundmen were there night and day for weeks. I didn't go, I mean, really less people the better, because they're more free to be themselves. Although we worked with some of the biggest correspondents, Wallace, Schaefer, Bradley, Diane Sawyer, Connie Chung, Dan Ruther, you name it. We knew that these characters were so strong, and we wanted the audience to connect with them, not with any correspondent. So we did this story without any correspondent. And we did 2 of them. One aired 6 months after the Pentagon, the other aired a year after the Pentagon was hit. Louise and her husband Mike, Brian and his wife Mel, they told their stories to the camera and to us. What we got were intimate portraits of families in the survival mode. And we got something else that is very hard to turn away from. As you say, sometimes these stories are hard to, we got 2 beautiful love stories. So this is a clip of that.
Read about that? One time she'd come out of surgery and she was in a lot of pain. She was awake but hurting. And the nurse had just given her a shot. And no matter what we were doing, no matter where I was standing, the way I shaped my mouth, it hurt. So I looked at her and I said, breathe. And she looked at me really funny. And I said, remember how we had our children? And she said, no. And I said, damn it, breathe. Well, by the time she got to say the word no again, she'd fallen off asleep. And the medication worked. Well, unbeknownst to her, I'd done exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to take her attention away from it, let the medication work.
You begin to know how long surgery is going to take. You get to the end of that waiting period and you get the big knots in your stomach and the anxiety. It's a big waiting game. Thank you. I certainly appreciate that. How you doing, sweetheart? But he would expect me to be there when he got out of surgery. How you doing, babe? I'm staying, but I'm going nowhere. I'm right here. And I wanted to be there because I knew that he wouldn't really understand a lot of times what they had done, and he'd want, an explanation, and just be there to hold his hand and just to be there so he wasn't by himself. Well, sweetheart, I love you. And most nights after surgery, I would spend the night in his room with him just to make sure he was okay and if he needed anything. It was my husband, and I felt like I needed to be there.
She's a great lady, isn't she?
I know you pretty well.
Yeah.
Those were the last 2 stories we did for network television.
Okay, moving on. So, Sean and Andrea, one of your most recent projects got some notoriety in the Washington Post today. I'd like to have you discuss how you got involved in it, why you did the piece, and the impact that you believe it's had. We'll begin by Andrea. Let's go.
Well, there's a studio that is called A24, and some of you might know it or some know it. It's like you'll start to see it more and more in the very beginning of films because they're starting to get bigger and bigger. And they've reached out to us. They usually do feature films, but they reached out to us about a documentary ironically, about the peaceful transition of power in the presidential office. And so we were trying to, this is during COVID, we were trying to get in to somehow film the transition of Biden's transition team. And that, because no one had really ever done, let's look at, how does that happen, the changing of the guard, so to speak, between presidential office. And so we were thinking, hey, why don't we have a crew down at the mall. It's Trump's last speech. And it seems like it might be a little bit hyped up and charged, but that's about what we kind of thought was going on. And we were actually finishing a film about the U.S. women's soccer team called the LFG, and we had a rough cut due. So we had sent a crew down to film, and we were on the phone, going through the rough cut with CNN and HBO, we did that film with. And we just started seeing things on TV. We started seeing the scenes that we all know, and it got worse and worse. And at first we could talk to the videographers down there, and then that all of a sudden, we lost him for about 2 hours, and yet we're watching when everybody else was watching, and he's a really good friend of ours. So we're very scared, and he turned out to be okay, but that night, we were like, what the heck just happened, and we're in a very different movie now. And so we called them and we said, we really, really need to make this film. We don't exactly know how we're gonna tell it, but we'd like to do it the way we're good, what we do well through people. We just need to figure it out and give us a beat. And we started. We just felt like there was a lot of films coming out about Jan 6, and there was a lot of news clips and sort of almost like a forensic unpacking. But what we were really drawn to is what were the people that were there, and how do you go about telling that story? At first we were thinking, okay, well, you maybe bring in an insurrectionist and somebody else who was working there, and it just felt more and more we looked into it, the people that came to work that day, that they didn't sign up for any of that, they just came to work, and they serve the public, they serve our city, they serve the nation, they serve the public, and they did an incredible service that day, that we should be very grateful that they did it that day and still doing it. And so we set out to find who the right chemistry of those people would be. And we wanted it to be through the geography in some ways, like people who were inside the Capitol and outside the Capitol, but more importantly, we wanted to just sort of give a different experience of like law enforcement and journalists and a congressman and a staffer. So we decided to do it through 6 people. And it's through the former MPD Chief of Police of DC, Robert Conti, who was 4 days on the job. Congressman Jamie Raskin, who I think everybody probably knows, he's the most well-known person in our film. 2 police officers, MPD police officers, Officer Hodges, Daniel Hodges, and Christina Laurie. Erica Lowe, who worked in communications in Clyburn's office, and Mel D. Cole, who was a photographer. He's a Black photographer who came out of hip hop and started following MAGA rallies. And after the George Floyd murder, he just felt like he wanted to turn his lens out of like the music world and started following these like MAGA rallies and trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. These people fascinate me. And that's why he was there. Sean found, you can tell the story how you came across his photos.
Oh yeah, I mean, after that happened, we were like everyone else, we were stunned and upset. But I think also after the inauguration, which was soon to follow that, I think I was even personally more upset because we had tanks and Humvees and fences. I had been almost every inauguration since I was a kid. I'm 4th generation Washingtonian. And so, like, from Washington. And so, like, for me, walking around and seeing, I'm not allowed to go on this street. There's a guy with a rocket launcher. I've been to countries that have that. I've been to countries where you're not allowed to vote. It's dangerous. It's horrible. I've been to countries where you're locked up if you're gay for your life. It's horrible. Like, we have a lot of freedoms here. We have a lot of amazing things. And so seeing that in our city kind of made me even more upset. So I was like everybody looking at social media and trying to figure it out. And I came across this photo of this officer, Mike Finneman, who you probably all know. He's very famous. Was kind of dragged into the crowd, but there was this one black and white photo that was just mesmerizing. I was like, who took that photo? And I started looking, and it became this photographer, Mel D. Cole. And I tried to get in touch with him. He didn't want to talk to us. He didn't want to talk at all. It took a lot of convincing, but he ended up, being in our film. I think he's one of the more powerful characters. I think our film, interesting films have, they have sometimes a life of their own as you start to make them. And I think we have the liberty and the ability. We're lucky sometimes we can kind of get out of the news cycle a little bit and try to. It's very hard to do that while you're making a film that is about news. I've never done that. We did that with our LFG film as well. is really, really hard because you're getting all these headlines and you're thinking you're missing it, this else is happening. You get distracted by all these kind of shiny news balls, I guess, around you that are floating, and you have to stick to your guns, you have to stick to your story. Why are you
People
doing
will
this?
probably watch it 2.5 years or 2 years later.
Yeah.
You know, even though you're right in the middle of the news, so you have to kind of figure out what you go after and what you don't.
So, you know, we decided to like tell this story. It's also like, if you're making a film, this is an amazing story. Like, it started at 5 a.m. and ends the next day. It's got a storyline, it's got an epic battle, it's got winners, losers, kind of, and it's got amazing characters. And so we just started to, I mean, our office was like a forensic scene, it was a timeline of everything that happened every second of the day. We were getting footage, and the footage had to correspond to every second something happened. And then, you know, we needed to find those characters that could tell that story of that day. And in the unraveling of it, there are things in our film that I think people haven't thought of. I think people haven't seen. I think our film is probably the first film to deal with the idea of race with that day. It's got 3 Black characters in it that talk about how that day made them feel. Even the white characters talk about racism. I think it is probably the most violent portrayal of that film outside of the Capitol. Like, what was happening, the DC police were getting bombarded for 4 to 5 hours in hand-to-hand combat with people with sledgehammers and bats with nails sticking out. Things that I haven't seen in the news or in our film. And I'm really proud of that we took the time to try to find every camera angle, every option, and also took the time to listen to the people that tell their stories and share their stories with us in a way. And then the last part in our film that I think has not been talked about, was just talked about in the New York Times actually 2 days ago, which Andrea, to her credit, fought tooth and nail to have in it. It scratched at her in the beginning and she's like, there's something to this, there's something. Sometimes that happens with us. I might say like, no, I don't think this is interesting. And then Andrea's like, no, I think this is interesting, or vice versa. But the idea that, like, where was the National Guard? Like, what happened with that? Like, they were, anyone that's grown up in DC knows the Armory is close, the DC National Guard is there. We all grew up there. We're used to the National Guard being deployed to certain things. So where were they? You know, 4 to 5 hours, where were they?
Because we started watching all the footage, because we have a timeline of the whole film, but we didn't want to make that the point of the film. We just wanted to be right and make sure that no one debunked anything they were going to watch, because this thing that we show of this one cop getting hit with a brick happened at 3:05 but we showed it at 2 o'clock, right? Something like that. So we basically made sure every piece of footage is perfectly timestamped. The audio that you hear in it is exactly when it happened. But when we actually started putting it together and hearing all the radio calls, asking, pleading, begging for the National Guard to come, and the extra layers of bureaucracy that the military put on to the police, the Capitol Police and the DC Police, they were watching the same thing we all were for over 4 hours of watching, you know, America rip itself apart on air in front of the entire world, and police just getting beaten, just senseless. We watched it and I was like, where the hell is the National Guard? They saw what we saw, and once they were deployed, it took them 15 minutes to get there. So they got called at 12:38, and they didn't show up till after around 5:30. And I find that disgusting, and it's not okay. And I want people to know that. So, but more importantly, we wanted people to feel like every single one of our characters, except Jamie Raskin, said no when we first said, Officer Hodges said yes. Yeah. Everybody else said no, because they're not about the limelight. They sort of tucked that day away, and they didn't want to replay it again because it's so painful. And they were just trying to go about doing their job. Every single person you saw, and you'll see it in the trailer and in our film, went back to work the very next day. And they still work and serve, public servants and serve the country that way. So we are telling people, we want everybody to tell the people to watch this film. It's not about political party, it's about our country, it's an American story. It feels like a huge family fight that we have to sort out. And we want people to decide for themselves, but I think there's an enormous revisionist history about what happened. And what you're seeing is over 10,000 people swarm a Capitol. And that, we barely got out of that. And the MPD were the ones, the DC MPD police officers who weren't trained like soldiers, but, you know, local law enforcement saved our country and saved democracy that day. So I think we have enormous gratitude and sense, and I think the only thing, not to get off, I'll get off my soapbox for next clip, but, that we would implore you, is this has been a tricky film to get out, because it's a really uncomfortable piece of history that we all have to deal with, and it's something we really ask everybody, to see. It's going, you can rent it tomorrow on all these video on demands. It's available on Amazon and everything, as opposed to buy it last week, but now it's starting tomorrow. You can rent it, and you just tell everybody to see it, and however you tell them, whether you social media post or tell your family or tell your school. We've been told that it's like required viewing by people that like look at a lot of films and that they care about this country as well. And so that's it. So this is the trailer that you're about to watch, and
democracy needs a ground to stand on, and that ground is the truth. So we gotta tell the truth. If we can handle it.
You ready?
Thank you, and now we're going to go to questions and answers from the audience. I'm going to walk around. Maybe we should turn on the lights. Action camera.
This is just a mother talking, but this film is incredible.
And it's amazing the timing that we're having this event this evening.
I'm not a mother, I'm not related, and I get choked up because I've already seen it twice. So if you haven't seen it, so it's really hard to even frame a question, because I'd really like to sit and talk with you forever. And so I'd like to know, I really do think it needs to be very widely distributed. It is so powerful, and I'm a news freak, so I thought I knew everything about this. I learned so much from it. And the way that you focused on the 6 characters, I mean, they were just fantastic. So I want to thank you, but I also want to ask you, how can you and how can we get this film out there as widely as possible? It's phenomenal, and I'll predict it publicly. There's another Academy Award for Best Director.
I mean, it's just spreading the word. I mean, we are trying to do that as well. It's telling people it's for rent right now. We're trying really hard to get it on streaming platforms. It was supposed to be for free on Amazon Prime 2 weeks before it was supposed to be on free. We were told it was being reviewed by a Trust and Safety Commission. And then the film was told maybe it will be on after the election. We're not sure. So we took it upon ourselves, and also there hasn't been a lot of normal publicity put into it. So we take it upon ourselves to kind of do that, and people like yourself have come out and tried to help and spread the word. And our friends who are journalists have spread the word, and so I think it has the ability to do that. I think it shows that people, I mean, even the Washington Post, like I think the critic said, it's required viewing, and I think that it shows that even though streamers and people think everybody's done with this and we shouldn't look at it anymore, that we need to. That's what Andrea says, like, we need to watch this. It might be uncomfortable, but we need to watch it.
Yeah.
It's important.
We were reviewed in the Washington City paper and I really appreciated what they wrote. They said, you're supposed, a psychologist will tell you that when you're ready to deal with trauma, you have to deal with it in a safe space, and that's what this film is, in the safe space that we live in. And I love that. But quite honestly, the fact that it was pulled 2 weeks before it was supposed to be, Amazon Prime Video, when you get your membership, right, you can get a huge host of films for free. That's 200 million people that get that. And all of a sudden, like, if you're gonna pay $20 for a film, that changes everything. Especially if you don't have a lot of money, right? Even for rent, it just kind of like puts that little extra step. And so we feel like, quite honestly, it just happened. We were really caught off guard. So we've been doing everything. It's gonna be in DC Docs, the film festival in DC. There's a screening on June 15th there. And that's the next time we know it's gonna be a theater screening. But most importantly, we kind of, to be honest, we're trying to figure out how we can get this out there with an impact campaign where we basically, it's kind of like a we the people feel, like you want to bring it to people, to like high schools, to colleges, to get those people talking about it and seeing it. And
What was the reason for pulling it that you were told?
we didn't get a lot of reasons.
We didn't get a lot of reasons. We were.
Nothing, no reason?
I mean, we were told by the studio, they think it's political reasons.
But don't you think that's a story right there?
It is. It's-
So if you go and look this film up, a lot of people are starting to write about it.
People are starting to
Yeah.
people are starting to write about it, and but even that, it's like it's hard to still break through. But people are. Politico wrote a really good article that's been picked up by a lot of people, and actually, not through us. I mean, smart people can just go. Like even the studio who made the film A24, the writer for Politico said, "This film's been made by Academy Award winner. It's not on your website," and they were like, "Well, it should be." And he's like,
That was a mistake.
"That was a mistake," they said. It took him 5 people to get to do that. So.
It's discoverable. If somebody made a decision, it's discoverable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that this is not an isolated incident, that entertainment companies, information companies, there's really not that many, and they control a lot of your entertainment and what you get through and not. And if they feel like all of a sudden half their viewing base is going to have a really hard time in the corporate interest, people are scared right now. And that's honestly what I think is going on. And so I'm really uncomfortable with this got pulled 2 weeks before it was supposed to come out, and not until later, and I think everybody else should be too. And so I think the best thing to do is, I'm not it's staying very positive and getting it out there, and sometimes everybody's feeling like, what can I do right now? Well, I think what we can all do is talk about it and get it out there and help, and like, if people are interested, we're gonna try to figure out some kind of impact campaign really soon, and then help us, right? Like, to get it seen, and we'll have more information.
This may not be at all possible, but it just seems that your connections, why not in 60 minutes?
Well, actually,
Because it needs to already now.
we have some calls to be,
We're working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it.
So we'd love to have it on a much more accessible platform, right?
We don't know anybody there anymore.
I find it ironic that the Washington Post is praising this film profusely,
I know.
and it's owned by Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
Who also owns Amazon.
Yep,
How do you square that?
I don't
I don't
know. I mean, it's not like he's sitting in those boardrooms making those decisions for people, right? Like it speaks to a bigger issue that seems to be going on. I mean, I don't square it.
It's odd, like the number one, I don't know if it's still number one now, but for the last 2 or 3 weeks, number one movie in America has been this movie called Civil War, which was the same distributor that put out A24 that put out our film.
I'd be curious, how many people have seen that?
So, yeah, so it's basically a dystopian, kind of as if Jan 6 led to a civil war, but that film doesn't give you any context to why there's a civil war. It just paints America in a really horrible way. It's miserable. I don't like the movie, so it's not, I don't think it's right, but they use images from January 6th in their movie. So it's weird, but it's #1 grossing movie. I mean, $91 million. Like, so how come this film then from the same studio isn't piggybacked off that one? I don't understand. Like, both of us are shaking our heads always. And at first we thought maybe it's not a good film. Maybe it's just like, too newsy or something. But the reviews and the people have told us they can't stop watching it. They really like it. It's entertaining too. So I'm.
There's a publicity line, it's about 2 civil wars, one that happened and then one that almost happened. So they could have done a great promotional campaign.
Yeah, so I think the other part is like, and this is happening too, is that, just people that own, that make the decisions of what we all should watch and not watch. I think there's this thing where no one wants to talk about politics. They put things in categories all the time. And so our film sometimes gets put in a category and we keep trying to scream from the rooftops. It's about people's stories. It's not a film really about politics or film. So, but I think we just spread the word, and I believe that a good film will rise to the top. I mean, when we made War Ants, no one knew about the war in northern Uganda. We made Innocente, no one knew who she was. So I believe in kind of the groundswell will happen.
We have a question here.
Yeah, I had a question for Paul and Holly. You spoke very complimentary of your experiences with Mike Wallace and how much you learned. I had a very different experience with Mike Wallace. And I wanted to ask you about tactics, journalistic tactics, and the morality of them. One of our employees was ambushed literally by Mike Wallace and the camera crew. They were doing a story where it was clear that he had already decided what this story was. And this poor guy had no idea that, he was going to be on camera. He would not have been a spokesman that we would have designated him if it was. I was curious as to what you think about the journalistic morality of ambush interviews, like the kind of.
Well, that's how 60 Minutes created themselves, okay? These ambush interviews and all that. We didn't do any of that stuff. And if they'd asked us to, we wouldn't have done it. We saw the other side of Mike Wallace, the compassionate side, the side where he cared about his characters, where we did 2 stories on a mentally handicapped couple that got married and then had a child. And to see Mike Wallace interviewing a mentally handicapped couple was a rare event, okay? And he was so compassionate and wonderful to them. So that's the kind of thing we did with him. We didn't do these stories you're talking about. We don't like those kind of stories. I ambush him, but that's how 60 Minutes started. That's how they got their, they got noticed because they did this kind of thing. So I don't know. You want to say anything about that?
Well, he got paid to do investigative stuff, and he was one of the best at it. And he had great investigative producers working for him. He made some mistakes. He always admitted his mistakes.
Not always.
Not always. But he could get really mad at you, but I went in his office one day and had a long talk with him and said, "You can't talk to me this way." And he said, "Why?" I said, "You hurt my feelings, and I'm working for you. I want to make you look the best there is. You can't beat the shit out of me while you're doing it." He says, "Do you think I do that?" I said, "Yeah." He is an amazing, intelligent man. To keep up with him is hard.
I can apologize, some of his producers, you could have them, believe me. Anyway, and those were the ones that did those kinds of stories.
We have a question?
When you're dealing with somebody who is not comfortable in front of a camera, do you have any tricks to help them open up and answer your questions, or to show the side of them that is their truth?
I think you just say, we're having a conversation here. Don't think too much about your answers. We're just having a conversation. And you would get them warmed up beforehand. And so they would know you and be able to talk to you. What do you guys?
But the Innocente, that moment,
Innocente was difficult.
Yeah, that moment you saw in the film.
of the young girl with the paint on her face, Innocente.
Yeah, we actually, so we do this thing, I mean, it's interesting, I was listening to them talk about talking heads, and I think our films tend to have a lot of talking heads, a lot of faces talking right at you, which we like, because we get to study the face and get to sit for a moment and see how they're reflecting on what they say, and you get to watch them and they're looking right at you. But that moment, in Ascente, we actually were having a hard day, and she was having a hard day talking, and we just let the camera run and left the room, and she looked at the camera and said, well, we were not there.
Yeah, we were asking her, like, who are you?
Yeah, we just say whatever you want, and like,
Yeah,
we're
so
gonna
we
leave.
And it was the open.
It was the open.
Right.
But I think we just, a lot of people we found, they're not listened to. I think people aren't, I remember my dad actually told me this a long time ago. He said, you always have to listen to people. People aren't used to people listening to them. And even when they're saying stuff you don't want to hear, you gotta listen to them. And I think when you listen to people, when you truly listen to people, and you show that you're interested in what they have to say, they start to share themselves with you. And I think that there aren't many people that are good at that. And I think like when Andrea's asking questions to these people, when I'm there, I mean, we interview people for sometimes 4.5 hours, I mean, long time, and they have these really intimate, deep conversations with us. And I think there's a connection that's made between myself and the character, and Andrea and the character. And we also spend a lot of time with them before we film.
I feel lucky that I still feel like I can't believe they're allowing me to sit down. They barely know me, and they're gonna answer these questions about what's most important to them. I mean, that's like so beautiful that you get to do that with people, and they walk in. Oftentimes we're doing stories about parts of their life that some really hard things, hard, painful things happen, and they're kind of like explaining to you how they got through it, and we're all learning from it, right? Like we learn it, and we put it in the film, and everybody watches learn it, and I just think that people appreciate feeling comfortable because they sense that. They sense that you care and that you're interested, and that if they ever want to turn the camera off, we always say yes.
Yeah, and you're not taking from them. I think a lot of filmmakers take from people. I mean, we are taking, but they come across like they're taking, I want this great bite, I want this thing from you. Can you do it sooner? Can you do, and people don't like that. And so it's better if they give to you than you take from them. And I think that that's kind of what comes across when we work together, and the way that we talk, and the way we listen.
There's a couple of differences between us. They get to use music, and we were never allowed to use it. I resent that. But the biggest difference is, they have to raise the money for their films. We never did. We always worked for networks, for television, we really did not have to, and that's hard. That is really, really hard. That takes up half of their time, is who's gonna fund this film? Who's gonna pay for it, And we never had to worry about that. We could just do our thing.
One more
But they got to use music, and we didn't.
We didn't use correspondence.
I wanna end up on a little something here, because I think that we have the best job in the world.
Yeah.
Who else could go meet people like Boxer Larry Holmes, President Reagan, Admiral Rickover, Julie Andrews, Chris Rock? It goes on, and we are so lucky to have had this job.
And we are so lucky to have you tonight. I personally want to thank Ollie and Paul, Sean and Andrea for coming here. I mean, they're remarkable, 2 generations that have changed the landscape of American filmmaking. And thank you so very much.
Thank you,
By the way,
Bruce.
we have one more clip. Brandon Central.
There's a battle being fought for public spaces
Let's-
all over the country.
We stop it for a second.
It's more apparent that in one of the grandest spaces of all, New York's Grand Central Station, homeless people with no place to go claim it as a refuge. Travelers with places.
This is gonna recycle through, so if you'd like to leave, get out and leave, but this is gonna, one of the films of
We ever did, it's 11 minutes.
It's okay.
So as you leave, maybe sit and watch this for a little while, then if you want to leave, go ahead and leave.
So this is 11 minutes, so it's up to you. But again, thank you all for coming. We're so appreciative, and thank you, the fine family.
60 minutes, rewind.
There's a battle being fought for public spaces all over the country. In no place is it more apparent than in one of the grander spaces of all, New York's Grand Central Station. Homeless people with no place to go claim it as a refuge. Travelers with places to go find the homeless and unsightly embarrassment. But somehow, the grand old station is growing long gone, manages to accommodate everything.
The best writer in television.
The terminal once was called the greatest enclosed space in the country, an architectural masterpiece. In its prime, it greeted presidents and world statesmen and international gendarmes. Its name, Grand Central, and its trains, like a 20th Century Limited, captured the romance and elegance of an age. At dawn, when the terminal still closed, that age is alive, at least in your mind. It's easy to imagine a scene of bustling Pullman porters and packed rubber luggage and passengers bound for distant California. But then when its early morning opening to its late night closing, squalor overwhelmed the old terminal. At 5:30 in the morning, when the terminal opens, grimness waits at the gate.
Let's go.
The first arrivals are not travelers, but the shuffling legions of New York's homeless. The terminal's melancholy gatekeeper is Frank Leon, a cop who's seen too much of this world.
You in touch with the world, Chris? Let's go. Come on. Just gonna get all this stuff out here, get moving.
Officer Leona's concerns are simple. Get this human driftwood through one day, one emergency, and one meal at a time.
We serve a breakfast show over at St. Agnes. These are some of the problems. He's a homeless man, carries all his belongings with him. It's unreal. This is all he does. I was in Korea 25, 30 years ago. It's just not Korea.
Grand Central is the gateway to the world for many life crosses paths.
Conductor Flash Gallen comes in from suburbs plain and fancy with the station's morning commuters.